attach very much significance at this stage to anything Zelensky says. He's the leader of a lost cause. I mean, you might as well just tell him to stay out of the room, and the adults in the room will sort this out, whether he likes it or not. And I can tell you, though, we never hear this on the mainstream media in the United States, but the people in Ukraine are sick of this war. They're exhausted, and they will absolutely support the end of the war, even if they don't like the outcome. And I know Ukrainians, and they're very stubborn people, but they're not fools. And what the Russians currently hold is, as a minimum, is Russian. And they know that. And they know that they've mistreated and oppressed the Russians in the past. And this is not going to be tolerated in the future. So I don't think Zelensky has much to say, frankly. He can talk all he likes, but I don't think it's going to make a difference to the ultimate outcome.
Well, and especially in that soundbite we played at the top of the show where Trump was point blank asked, will the support continue on or will it go down? And he said, yeah, it's going to go down for sure. That should signal to Zelensky he's not going to get all this stuff he's been asked for. But to your point that you raised a little bit earlier, what does matter is what's the ground truth on the battlefield. What is that? And that matters. And there has been just a couple of recent reports here in just the last week or so that give a really powerful snapshot of what it is, no matter what anybody wants. And that is the Wall Street Journal, for example, said that in the last 3 months, 6,000 projectiles have been fired from from Russia into Ukraine. And that's talking about drones, missiles, FAB bombs, and the like. 6,000, and that is 3 times higher than the number fired in the previous 3 months. 3 times higher than just the previous 3 months, and 4 times higher than the same number of months in 2023. At the same time, we also saw that the territory that's been gained by Russia continues to pick up speed. And by the way, in the center of the screen, you may not be able to see the numbers where you are. There was 50 square kilometers had been captured by Russia in June. And then every month thereafter, it continues to substantially go up to the last month is in November, 702 square kilometers of additional territory, which is 4.7 times more than Russia gained in the entire calendar year of 2023. And you see the pace is continuing to go up. Then you add on top of that the 100,000 desertions on the Ukraine side, the difficulty they're having manning, just even bringing more people in. And you just see everywhere you look, there is no basis for anyone to even have fantasies like Zelensky is having here, or any in the West for that matter. How do you account for such a dramatic contradiction between what is physically evident and the words coming out of so many people's mouths?
Well, first, let's keep in mind that we're talking about an area that is roughly the size of the United States on the east side of the Mississippi. Or you're talking about armies marching across all the southern states and all the way up to Ohio and Kentucky and eventually up into Pennsylvania. This is an enormous area. And there are pockets of Ukrainians fighting in some of these woods. It's not meaningful, and they will be rooted out and killed and destroyed eventually. But the Russians are very deliberate about this business because, once again, they did not enter this war for the purpose of conquering Ukraine. That was always nonsense. They were never interested, and they're not interested in that now. They certainly do not want to have to govern and administer millions of Ukrainians. That's the last thing they want to do. The only people that they want inside Russia are people that want to be there. And those are primarily Russians. Now that has to be understood. I think the second thing is the contradiction has been there from the first day. All we have to do is roll back to February and March of 2022 and listen to everybody tell us the Ukrainians are winning, the Russians are incompetent, and they can't do anything. The Russians are losing thousands, the Ukrainians aren't taking any casualties. Listen, that was always wrong. It never had any basis in fact. So here we are, almost 3 years later, and we're looking at a humanitarian disaster in Western Ukraine and in much of Eastern Ukraine, a disaster that was never necessary. This is over as far as the Russians are concerned. They're happy to end it, but they're not going to surrender anything unless they get something on the table that guarantees their security. This has always been about their legitimate security interests in Ukraine. Nobody seems to want to mention that. They have legitimate security interests there, have always had them for centuries. They're not going to surrender those. They're happy to let the Ukrainians go off and govern themselves to their heart's content. But there will be no NATO membership under any circumstances. There will be no foreign forces, no foreign bases. If people want to know what President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov are anticipating is something on the model of the Austrian state treaty. Go back and look at it. That's your model. That will work. And that would be very good for Ukraine, because then the Ukrainians could focus on what really is important, and that is building prosperity and economic strength and triaging this society that's almost completely destroyed.
And you know, there's a lot of people. Zelensky also in the last just few days has continued to resurface these claims by Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron about maybe we'll put Western troops into Western Ukraine as part of a negotiated settlement. But as you say, the Russians aren't going to do this. And here's one other thing that needs to be brought into borne by these people. See, those are the outcomes we want. We want to set the terms on something that we like or that's acceptable to our side. But here's the thing. Russia doesn't have to do any of those things. And let me show you why. This is the map of the current front lines here. And this is some of the southern part near the Pokrovsk area, which is right here. And you see that the Russians are really moving forward in all these different areas. I'm going to show you something from the Military Summary channel this morning that's going to be talking about something that was happening right in this area here where the Russians continue to move up to get closer to Pokrovsk here. But you see that they have been making territory advances in a lot of places. And the Ukraine side is in danger of having a large area cut off here because Russians are making progress up the middle and on the flanks. But watch this clip here from Military Summary channel about what the possibility of coming next right here is.
Other sources are saying that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Shevchenka, and now the Russians have no barriers to move further in the northern direction and to begin the battle for the city of Pokrovsk. So basically, the Ukrainian defense of Pokrovsk collapsed completely. Without showing any resistance. The Ukrainians had enough of time to prepare additional fortifications and strongholds, but now we see that the Ukrainians did nothing during the previous days, and most likely the city of Pokrovsk could fall very, very soon, very, very fast, and this might be the fastest battle ever since the beginning of the special military operation.
You know, that last part there is what got my attention. I mean, we've seen the advances, and when I showed you all that territory that's been gathered and the increasing firepower, none of that's surprising. But that Ukraine has had all this time, when people have known for months that Pokrovsk was the target for all these operations, and yet they still have not been able to, or they have not been willing to make defensive fortifications. So that also could fall pretty quick, which could literally unhinge the entire southern part of the Eastern Front. So when you see that kind of situation on the ground matched with all these other realities we're talking about, how much longer do you think Ukraine can continue to offer resistance?
I think as long as we pump cash into it, assuming that the cash we send, along with the equipment we send, about 50% of it is sold on the black market, or it ends up in the bank accounts of senior Ukrainian officials in the Congress and the government or in the military, I suppose that they'll sacrifice as many Ukrainians as possible as long as the cash shows up and they continue to grow rich. The first time that I think you would see a readiness to call an immediate halt is when the Russians are standing on the Dnieper River and decide to cross it and make a move directly on Kiev. That's the point at which the crooks are running this thing. And they are crooks, Dan. You look at somebody like Zelensky, who was a sort of a cheap comedian, a third-rate actor who's built up into something he never was, and then plays this role of national leader who's not even Ukrainian, for God's sakes. This whole thing is absurd. That is going to go on as long as the cash is there to pay for it, and as long as he has and his friends have security. And a lot of that security is provided by the West, specifically by the British, and to a lesser extent, us. So this sort of comic opera is going to continue unless what I just described happens. It's tragic for the people of Ukraine. They didn't sign up for this. They were not consulted on this. If we go back to the election that Zelensky won, this man from nowhere who was put up as a candidate, he told everyone that he was going to talk to the Russians to put an end to this, that he was going to negotiate with them. There's no reason for any war. And that's one of the reasons he had overwhelming support. People all wanted no war. Well, they still do. Now they've lost most of the manhood of Ukraine in this pointless struggle for nothing. And the people at the top are just gotten richer and richer and richer. These are nothing but criminals. This is an organized crime state. We've got to come to terms with that reality and stop pretending otherwise. And I think President Trump will very quickly come to this conclusion without a whole hell of a lot of help. And I think he may have come to that kind of conclusion with Zelensky for the very reasons that you're telling me. Zelensky is a joke. He's an empty suit. He babbles, and he should be thrown out of the room. And this war should be ended. I think Donald Trump understands that. I think he'll do it, but he can't do it alone. He's got to host a conference that involves the key states that are on Russia's borders. And that includes Germany, by the way. The Germans have to be part of this. They must be part of the end the war caucus, if you will, that includes Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania. They've all got to be present. They've all got to sign up for an end to this and for the neutrality of Ukraine. And he can do this. If there's anything we know about Europe, what is it, Dan? There's no one leading anyone in Europe with the possible exception of someone like Orban. The rest of these people are followers. And I guess you have to point to someone like Starmer as an outlier because he thinks he's safe sitting on that island, punishing his own population and hurling rocks at the Russians. I don't think he is, and I think he ought to shut up. But that's his position. He thinks he can do anything. This has got to end. And I think President Trump is the man to do it. But he's got to pursue this differently from what most people have anticipated. This is not an imposition by Washington. He has to be someone who herds the cats into the room and comes up with this agreement based on what he says. And he's got to say, this must be neutral. You know, that is the critical point.
I wish you had been the one that was selected as the envoy, because I'd really like for you to be running that kind of stuff up there. Or at the very least, I hope that someone's paying attention.
Well, remember, President Trump will make the decisions, and stop wasting time listening to others that are on the staff. He will make the statements. He will make the points. And when he does, listen carefully, because I think he is a very reasonable man, and he is a realist. He is not in fantasy. He's not living on Fantasy Island like most of the Hill.